All right. For the past decade or decade and a half, we've seen a really remarkable urban renaissance, a back to the city movement. Well, you heard about it, just what's happened in Miami. It's happened in New Orleans. It's happened in Providence and on the whole eastern seaboard. Happened in Gary in the greater Chicago area. But one of the things that we know is, as that has occurred, has younger, more affluent, more educated people have moved back to cities. Our cities have become more divided, more unequal, more unaffordable, increasingly gentrified. So in a sense, we face a crisis of the comeback of the cities, a crisis of the very success of urban America, in addition to facing all of the issues of concentrated poverty and inequity that cities have historically faced. So today what we want to focus on for the next 20 or 25 minutes is how do we move to not just a competitive city, not just an innovative city, but how do we move to a more inclusive city? We have three incredible mayors with us. Mayor Mitch Landrieu of New Orleans, Mayor Jorge Elorza of Providence, and Mayor of Gary, Karen Freeman-Wilson. And I want to start and just go down the line. Mayor Landrieu was sworn in as the 61st mayor of the fabulous city of New Orleans. We've known each other for quite a while. He is the first mayor in the city's history to be elected by majorities of both white and black voters. He's created a unique public-private partnership on economic development. He's introduced an incredible strategy to connect disadvantaged job seekers to new opportunity. And very importantly, he's raised the city employees' minimum wage to a living wage, $10.10 an hour. 3 or 4 years ago, when we met in New York City, you asked me a question and we dialogued about it. We talked about a city like New Orleans or like a city like Miami where more than 50% of the jobs are low-wage service jobs, right? They're the jobs that people who work in hotels and hospitality, tourism. We know that we can upgrade those jobs, and we know that there's research that shows that if you do make those jobs better, you get higher productivity, better wages, better quality. So when you're thinking about economic opportunity in New Orleans, Mayor Landrieu, how are you thinking of the ways to make those service jobs that are the backbone of an economy stronger jobs, more family-supporting jobs?
All right. Well, first of all, thank you so much, and it's great being with my fellow mayors. You know, when we got hit with Rita, Katrina, Ike, Gustav, the national recession, the BP oil spill, I mean, it was a lot. And it was hard to come back from there, which we have done miraculously with the help of a lot of people. But as we have gained more success and as more people have started coming in and New Orleans has become an ascendant city, like you mentioned earlier, guess what? All of a sudden you got new problems. In New Orleans, we always believe that diversity is a strength, not a weakness. But if some people are moving in and then they're forcing other folks out, how's that work? How do people really participate in the growth and the value of the city? So we've spent a lot of time beginning to think about what our role is in that. So, you know, on the cost of housing, for example, which is maybe outpricing some of the folks that are working in the hospitality industry, thinking, how am I going to deal with this? Do I go the New York model and impose rent controls and have the government tell people what to do? Do I ignore it and let the marketplace take place? Or do I look around and listen to other mayors and think about inclusionary zoning and ways to tell developers that if you want to play in my city, you can play, but everybody's got to get a chance to play on the playground as well. So we've worked on that. On economic growth and opportunity, every mayor wants to go put a flag in the ground and say, we invited GE to come in and they planted 300 jobs to pay $100,000. But the reality is that most of the people work in other jobs. And so you and I, we've talked a lot about building jobs from within, creating entrepreneurship, adding value to the jobs that currently exist, besides just telling the employees, hey, you got to do a better job of taking care of your people. And we began to think through economic development from that perspective, and lo and behold, what we've found is what was obvious in front of us. There are a lot of people that don't have jobs. There are jobs that exist, but they're not properly trained, and our community and technical colleges are not really ready, you know, or entrepreneurial enough to change their academic programs to line these folks up with the jobs that exist, and we began to work on that as well. And like anything else, I mean, if you can identify the problem and you start to work on it, eventually you'll get better. And if people know that you care about them and they know that they have a chance, they'll involve themselves, and then you'll figure it out.
You know, one of the biggest problems in our cities remains concentrated poverty, even with the comeback and racially concentrated poverty. We talk about the 1%, but it's really 33% of us in the knowledge jobs and the good jobs that are doing well. 66% of Americans in urban centers and suburbs being left behind? I know you've created a very interesting, really model economic strategy, economic opportunity strategy, both in general and with regard to African American, minority, and concentrated poverty across races. Can you just tell us briefly about what's the guiding principles
well,
of that?
first of all, I don't want to ignore the fact that economic development, going out and encouraging businesses to come in and being a knowledge-based center is really important, and we all have to do that. But at the same time, you can't ignore the facts that 50% of the young men that are in your city or opportunity youth are not working. They're doing something else, and they're doing something you don't want them to do. So we created something called a pathway to prosperity. I got that name actually because one of my kids got sick once. We were in Children's Hospital, and in order for me to find my way to the right elevator, they had a yellow arrow and a blue one and a red one. It was a clear pathway to a place that we wanted to go to. So I told my economic development team, let's go find the kid, the guy. Now, politicians know this because we find voters really well. So we ought to be able to reach out and find the individuals that don't have a job and create a specific pathway to a job that we know exists. So we identified anchor institutions, right? And these are all in your cities. And in the shadow of these institutions, the people who need the jobs live, but the folks that work there come from someplace else. And so we said, let's see if we could connect these individuals to the jobs that exist. So we're building a new university medical center. Now, security guards, med tech, phlebotomists, all the way up to being the CEO of the hospital, we started thinking about what is the pathway for that young man to that particular job. And then we started piecing together what steps needed to be taken. And now we needed help, so we got Strive to come in, which is a 4 or 5 week intensive course of soft skills training for individuals, returning citizens, and actually started putting them through the paces. And many of them are now getting hired directly to the jobs that we set at the end of the pathway, and we're beginning to see some help and some work in that area as well.
Cool. I want to turn to Mayor Elorza. Mayor Elorza was sworn as mayor of Providence just a few years ago in 2015 after running on a platform that made social and economic inclusion its centerpiece. Within his first 100 days, Mayor Elorza appointed an innovation officer to streamline activities and to create innovation throughout the city. And he too, like Mayor Landrieu, is focused on economic opportunity. I know you thought a lot. We were just talking about the focus on inequality. One of the things that we truly believe is that inequality is not just something that separates the classes. It's something that happens because our cities cluster advantaged people on the one hand, cluster disadvantaged people on the others. How are you trying to deal with this really central question of inequality in your city and our cities generally?
Right. So thank you, Richard, and it is great being here with Mitch and with Karen and with other fellow mayors. You know, we get together fairly often, and what we talk about is how to make our cities strong and vibrant. And there's a recognition among all of us that it's impossible to have a strong and vibrant city with the levels of inequality that many of us are experiencing. And this hits home in Providence because we were just listed as one of the cities with the highest levels of inequality in the United States. And I want to come back to something that Mitch just mentioned. For all that we do around economic inclusion, there's a lot of substantive work that needs to be done, and you know we have to keep moving forward. But the guiding principle that guides me and the work that we do at City Hall is making sure that people feel as though you're looking out for them, making sure that the community feels as though you're fighting for them and you're speaking out for them even when they're not there. And the reason why that's so important is because if they feel as though you're championing their interests, then they're going to engage much further. And once you have them fully engaged, then we can really include them. Because we can have the best laid out strategy, but if the strategy just isn't reaching the target audience, the community that needs it the most, it's going to fail. And so we always start off with making sure that people feel that sense of inclusion. And in everything that we do, you know, we look at some of the most vulnerable in our community. And Providence is about 44% Hispanic. And we have a large immigrant community as well. And especially with the rhetoric right now at the national level around immigration, you can imagine how some people who would normally stay below the radar are driven further and further underground. And what we want to do is instead of devaluing what they bring to the table, instead what we're reaching out and we're extending our hand to them, because it's my fundamental belief. My parents are immigrants. They came here as undocumented. But it's my fundamental belief that every single immigrant is inherently entrepreneurial. You know, it's this frame of mind, it's this spirit that regardless of what obstacle you confront, you're going to find a way over each one of those hurdles. And so we're reaching out to the immigrant community and letting them know that there's a place for them within our within the economic vibrancy of our city, and they have to be included in what we do. So I created a director of economic opportunity, and we're investing in our folks. We're completely transforming the way we do business, but most importantly, what we're doing is we're reaching out much more proactively out into the community to bring people in. I'll give one last example of what we're doing in this space, but you know, I'm a big biker, so I ride my bike to and from work. And about once or twice a week during the summer, I usually, on my way home, take a left turn and end up at a basketball court. So I play basketball with the kids, and it never fails. We end up having a nice time, and I speak with them afterwards. And it's amazing. In this neighborhood, it's almost always African-American kids. And without fail, every single time I've spoken with them, kids from 14 years old to 40 years old, they tell me, "Mayor, we're looking for work. Can you help us find a job?" And it's so important to be able to say, well, I have the exact ticket that you need. We have a bridge that can connect you with the opportunities that are out there. And I remind my team of this all the time, because if there's any narrative out there that says that folks in the inner city, young black men, young Latino men, don't want to work, that's absolutely false. And so, you know, engaging people and reaching out to the most vulnerable communities to make sure that they know exactly how to access the opportunities that we're creating and are available.
Great. One of the things we do know, and this is very important, I'm just finished a new book. We've done a lot of research on this. We've looked at inequality, segregation, affordability. And what's both interesting and also very disturbing is our most successful cities across the board, our most successful cities that have the highest rates of innovation and economic development have the highest rates of inequality, the highest rates of segregation, the highest rates of concentrated poverty, and the highest problems of affordability. So it's something, making sure we're inclusive as you're doing is critical. I want to get Gary Mayor Karen Freeman-Wilson engaged in the conversation. You are the first woman mayor to lead the city of Gary and the first African-American female mayor in the state of Indiana. Congratulations on your second turn.
Thank you.
And it's the mayor's birthday. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Happy birthday, Mayor. She's reduced the city's debt by millions. She's brought businesses and jobs, industrial jobs back to the city. She's had a long and distinguished career. She was CEO of the National Association of Drug Court Professionals and many other things. She served as Indiana's state attorney general. Gary has been one of those, you know, I'm from Newark. My dad worked in a factory his whole life. I saw that factory close. I saw Newark torn up by riots. I spent 20 years teaching in Pittsburgh. I saw what deindustrialization can be, but arguably Gary has been as hard hit, if not harder hit, than even those cities by deindustrialization. But you've been able somehow, through your leadership, to bring manufacturing jobs back to Gary. So tell us a little bit about how you've focused on that and how you've done it.
Well, I too am honored to be a part of this discussion with these august mayors and, you know, with you, Richard. One of the things that I think is important is that even though we have been able to bring manufacturing jobs back, one of the challenges that we had, you saw this in Pittsburgh and in Newark, we were a one-horse town.
Yep.
Still was that one horse, and we rode it until the legs came off, but it was important for us to diversify. And one of the areas that we diversified in was art. We started at the beach, at the lakefront. Many people don't know the other side of the lake, on the other side of the lake from Chicago is Gary, Indiana. We have a vibrant lakefront community that has emphasized art and art as an economic development tool. We have brought that notion downtown to Art House, thanks to Bloomberg Philanthropies. We have a new art, a public art project that will open next month, and everyone's excited about it. And so in addition to creating jobs, and creating jobs for people that I refer to as legacy residents. Yep. You know, when you lose half of your population, the focus is often to say, well, I want to bring new people to Gary, and we do, don't get me wrong, But it's also important to focus on the residents who have weathered the storm, to create opportunities for them and their children, not just in manufacturing. And so through Art House, we're combining art and also combining entrepreneurism to say to people, if you want to start a restaurant, if you want to work in the food industry, we'll provide training for the entrepreneurs, we'll provide training opportunities for those who want to work, for those who are entrepreneurs, and we'll do it all in a beautiful public art project.
So all three of you share this emphasis on not only economic development and economic inclusion using art and music. I'm the son of a factory worker, but what changed my life was the day my dad came home with a guitar. And that saved me from all the problems in Newark. That guitar was my focus, not books, not being a professor, being a guitar player, playing in a band. I saw the power of music in my life. But all three of you, all three, Providence, I told you, my first visit was to AS 220. Mayor Landrieu, when I came to New Orleans, you couldn't think of a city that's more associated. Maybe Mayor Barry will tell you national, but tied.
Should be wrong.
But cities that have music at their core. So talk to us a little bit about this. How does arts and music and the creative activities help create a more inclusive agenda and environment?
Well, a couple of things on this. First of all, Richard, when you wrote your book, The Creative Class, I must have misread that book, because I did read it, and it inspired me, because I was just about to become the lieutenant governor of the state. And the lieutenant governor of Louisiana is responsible for culture, recreation, and tourism. And it was usually focused on tourism, and then the state parks were passive things, and the museums were just whatever. But I had grown up with Harry Connick and Wynton Marsalis, and a whole bunch of folks that had to leave New Orleans in order to fulfill their God-given talents. And I remembered thinking that if I ever got anywhere, I'd try to create a space where people could do what they did and stay in New Orleans. Now, we have great music, we export it.
Yep.
We have great food, but you come to eat it. But I conceptualized something called the cultural economy. It's directly related to the creative class, and tried to figure out whether or not, like you did with the IT sector, defining it as a sector, which, by the way, did not always define itself as such before the digital revolution, to identify actually how many jobs there are that surround culture. Now, it wasn't just music, but it was art, music, historic preservation, architecture, food, anything that touched anybody that created something or added value to intellectual capital or to a native talent, to a raw talent. And we actually looked at it as an economic sector and realized that 12% of the people in Louisiana actually worked in this field. Now, when the oil and gas industry used to go to the appropriations table and say, Mr. Appropriators, can I have some money, or can we have a tax credit to incent the creation of jobs? We brought the entire creative cultural class together to say, wait a minute, our return on investment is 16-1, which is, theirs was only 7-1. So don't you think you might want to start thinking about ways to incent the creation and the growth of the cultural economy, because it was by nature diverse. And we started working a lot on that. And of course, it's not an accident that New Orleans is a sports entertainment capital. We worked on it, and we think about it, and tax policy and zoning and the way that we handle the fairs and festivals, which are innumerable now, have actually begun to employ thousands and thousands and thousands of people. And that adds to that wonderful ambiance that you feel when you come to New Orleans, because we want to host you to enjoy yourselves. And that's how we did it.
Mayor Freeman-Wilson, you pointed this out with Art House. You know, I think about like a young man here like Pitbull, how inspiring he is to the kids of Miami. Or in Toronto, where I spent part of the year here and part of the year in Toronto, Drake. I mean, the influence he has on young people. And we can go on and on. How does Art House really help these kids who are gravitating, like I did as a kid, to my guitar? My was Jimi Hendrix, but that's different. That kids are gravitating. How does art help pull these kids into an economic inclusion environment?
Well, it pulls them in because it's not just about food, it's about the display of talent. And the thing that I think is so important about talent, whether it's music, whether it's drama, is the ability to be such a unifying force in a community. It doesn't, that's a universal language. And so, even 40 or 50 years later, kids are talking about the Jacksons, Michael Jackson. our favorite sons. And just 3 or 4 blocks from our house, we have a new Jackson's mural. And that makes such a big difference about the way that people see their city. Yes, people want to work. Yes, that's our focus. But you also want to be proud about your hometown. And that's one of the challenges that you often get with inequality, that people feel so put upon and so forlorn that they forget that this is a place that you can be proud of.
I want to echo this. You know, if you think about, we talk about innovation, technology, Silicon Valley, you think about America's greatest innovation. Whether it's Louis Armstrong, we can go Louis Armstrong, we can go Michael Jackson and Jackson, John Coltrane, Charlie Parker, my idol, Jimi Hendrix. And it's not top down. This is coming from the bottom, our bottom up of our society. And Mayor Elorza, I wanted to talk to you about your project, especially working with youth there and tapping into youth with Providence Talks, and how you develop that and see that also as a strategy for becoming a more inclusive, shared prosperity community.
Sure. Well, first of all, we definitely take an equity approach to Providence Talks. So Providence Talks is Providence was the first winner of the Bloomberg Challenge. We won $5 million to put this program together. And it's been so interesting over the past couple of years. The idea behind it is that many low-income students, by the time they begin kindergarten, they've heard 30 million fewer words than their more affluent peers. And so how do we either reduce or eliminate that word gap? And what Providence Talks does is it measures the turns of conversation. So I speak with you, you speak with me, I speak with you. Those are 3 turns. Mm-hmm. The idea is to help parents with toddlers and infants 0 to 30 months old interact and engage with their children. And we found some really interesting things. The first thing that we found is that the parents who interact with their children the least, they're the ones who believe that they interact with them the most. And so we measure all of the data, and when we present it to them, it's really powerful when they say, well, you know, I guess you're right. And through that, we've been able to change behavior in over 30% of the cases, which the social scientists tell us that's a tremendous number.
That's really huge.
And so that's one really interesting thing. The idea behind the program was to have kids be more prepared by the time they enter kindergarten. But what's been really phenomenal about it is that we found that, you know, the principle behind this program actually turns out to be that a parent is a child's first and most important teacher.
No doubt.
And what this program does is that it gives parents agency. And so what we'll continue to measure is whether parents are actually more involved than they otherwise would be because they participated in this program. And my hunch is that they're going to be much more involved beyond, because now they see this is exactly what I need to do to help my children out with their education.
That's a great
One last question for all 3 of you, and you can see time is tight, so make it quick. We'll start with Mayor Freeman-Wilson and walk down. With the Clinton administration taking office very shortly, you heard how I got that in there. Look, people say mayors will run the world, but there has to be a role for federal policy in dealing with these issues of inequality, segmentation, affordability. If you had 1 or 2 points that you think should be at the centerpiece of a new urban policy under President Clinton, what would they be?
I would say the first thing is that if you invest in infrastructure, then you lead to the creation of a number of jobs that we have to be prepared to have people trained to take. The other is to continue the conversation at the highest levels about inequality, about race. I mean, this has been such a divisive campaign. We have to come together as a country and heal.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the only way we can move further as a nation.
Mayor Elorza?
It's said that there are 3 main political parties in the United States: Republicans, Democrats, and mayors. The mayors are focused on getting things done, and I would tell the president, trust us as mayors and engage us in partners on fulfilling your
Anything
agenda.
you need specifically that would be at the top of that partnership?
Oh man, we need so much. But trust us. Trust us. Allow us to define what our priorities are, and it'll bubble up and make her
Mayor Landrieu?
more effective.
You know, it's just 2 things. One, what's interesting is when you listen to mayors talk, we see problems and we solve problems. We don't try to win ideological arguments with each other. So that process of governing is really important. And the first thing I would say is, as the next president's designing their government, they do it through the eyes of mayors so that their DNA. And then secondly would be, if there was one issue that would bring us all together, it would be investment in infrastructure, because that is what would put everybody back to work in America. It would allow us to do the kinds of pathway to prosperity work to build generational wealth. And then it would make America really strong, because it's going to kind of push our DNA back up to where it needs to be. We'll be able to compete internationally like we have been for a long time.
My modest proposal, listening to you, the President has a National Security Council. She has a Council of Economic Advisors. The President needs a Council of Cities. A Council of Cities to listen to city builders and mayors.
And it needs mayors on each one of those other things,
Listening
too.
to you, that's my proposal. I'd like to thank Mayor Freeman-Wilson, and again, happy birthday, Mayor.
Thank you.
Mayor Elorza and Mayor Landrieu, and thank all of you.
26 years old.
There you go. Good answer.